1870 Gaff cutter, the advertisement read, and the phone number was local. It was a cold December day in 1990 when I first saw Emma high up on the fingering-hoe saltings opposite Wivenhoe, with the spring tides of the River Cone running through her. Her lines captivated me. Her fine entry and flat run aft spelt speed. She needed a new deck, new transom, sails and many other items. Basically she was a wreck. My son thought she was wonderful, but my wife was not amused. Later I found out she was called Snipe when sold in the 1920s as a very old boat by a very old longshoreman to a chap in Bosom. Peter Sainty had his Vigia just up the road and let me measure her and compare notes. Vigia is identical in dimensions and lines, but more finely built by Cork of Cowes in 1874. Now Bermudan rigged, the Vigia still has a mast step right forward for a uni-rig. She is now in Cowes Maritime Museum. In winter, new York sloops would reduce canvas by removing the bowsprit and jibs and set the mast in a forward step as a uni-rig. Emma's forward mast step was removed when a new stem was fitted. Emma, by comparison, is very crudely built, with only 10 planks a side on far fewer frames and handmade wrought iron fastenings. Emma and Vigia are typical of the American workboats of the 1800s, shallow draught, beamy centreboarders, so unlike the narrow beamed keelboats in the UK. I also had the opportunity to visit New York, and the New York Yacht Club kindly let me do some research in their library. Emma's lines exactly match those of the New York sloop of 1850 to 1870s, a very common workboat in the area. Particularly fast workboats were snapped up by yachties, who raced them for big bets in classes governed only by hull length, 20 to 30 feet. They were then hugely over-canvassed, with over 1,500 square feet split between just jib and main, so needed a big crew holding sandbags to ballast them, hence the nickname sandbaggers. I can imagine a ship's captain having some fun racing them in New York harbour and saying, "I'll have one of them," and taking them home on deck. Emma is smaller than a ship's gig. I managed to get her the few miles downstream to Alresford Creek before she sank. She is 24 foot on deck with a 6 foot bowsprit, 8'6" beam, 1'6" draught with the centreboard up. No ballast, she displaces about 1.5 tons. I had to replace Emma's sheer strake that was scored by hauling lines in over her gunwale, and sent a sample to Kew Gardens for identification. They replied it was Quercus alba, North American white oak. I worked hard in my spare time that winter, with the target of sailing in the Shotley Classic Boat Festival the next July 1991. Her depth is too shallow to have a practical cabin, so I built her as a half-decker, with a boom tent and 2 hammocks slung under the foredeck for berths. After 6 months of hard work every spare moment, my wife was not amused by that. Emma was jacked onto a trailer and ready to launch down the ancient ford at Alresford Creek. The ford is cleared of mud each spring by members of the Alresford Creek Boat Owners Association, who voluntarily manage the creek, keep it clean and buoy the entrance. The Shotley festival the first year was enjoyable, but showed up many faults that needed attention.
A locking out. Plan today is to sail to the River Deben. Involves a coastal passage to catch the tide across the Deben Bar. Seas are rough on the Deben Bar. As you can see, conditions for filming are atrocious. In the next sequence, the film was damaged by seawater, but I hope you agree that this unusual footage of classics in rough seas was well worth including. The committee boat, Scottish Sumo, was having trouble keeping station. She's a big MFV. This is Wyona. Wyona was built in 1908 by Tatel on the River Clyde, rebuilt by Mick Newman of Ipswich in 1991. This is Emma of Bosom. She's a New York Sloop, local American workboat. She was actually shipped over here as deck cargo, we believe, about 100 years ago. These craft in the winter would set a unirig with a mast set further forward in the eyes of the boat. Here she is overtaking Diva. Emma is a very fast boat with a centreboard and with a big crew like we have today. She can be sat out almost like a big dinghy. Now these little fellas, they had more sense than the rest of us. Their mummy and daddy said they shouldn't go out on a day like today. Today was the day we were meant to go out to Mistley, where we had force 9 winds blowing onto the quay. It's still blowing half a gale for the Shotley Week President's Race. This is the last day. The Pin Mill barge match has had to be set an inshore course, and we have to do the same for the President's Race. We call it the President's Race because it's staged on the Saturday so that our President, Rob Williamson, can take part. The course takes the fleet right up the Orwell to just off Pin Mill, then back down to Shotley, through the start line, then up the Stour, before finishing back at Shotley. Here's Rummer, a classic yawl, built 1958 at Wistocks of Woodbridge. Here's Emma of Bosom. She's been sailing exceptionally well this week. She's really lapped up the strong winds, despite being an open boat. Here's the 5.5 metre Gilliatt the Fourth. Maid of Taser. This is the President's own boat. This is an amazing result here. This tiny little gaff rigger, Emma of Bosom. She's well up with the hot shot Bermudans. Emma, she carried off the point series for the fastest gaff boat, very deservedly. sailed like a big dinghy.
Over the next winter and following years, many modifications were designed and made. For strong winds, an old cotton jib was set as a trysail. Mooring legs were made after she leant over in her mud berth and an old mooring eye punched a hole in her bottom. More sail was set with an experimental topper dinghy mainsail set upside down as a topsail.
Emma of bosom, multicoloured topsail, there's Merlin 3, it's a glass fibre Itchen ferry.
Followed by designs for an inverted second-hand jib which worked better and stowed along the boom. I bought an old spinnaker for £7, which my wife repaired after every race.
New York scow. Here's Janty, the Devon 4-tonner.
For light airs, a second spinnaker flew from the gaff, bringing the total up to 1,000 square feet. I built a tender that stowed on the coaming. Emma made the inside cover of the Classic Boat magazine and is the subject of some paintings. Some years we did very well with many prizes. We had many adventures, including losing our rudder in the middle of the Thames estuary, but managed to steer with a scandalised main and Genoa in the fresh easterly, and sailed the remaining 12 miles into the swale in 3 hours. Some clips of Emma in East Coast old gaffer races.
This is Stone on the River Blackwater, seen for the 1994 Old Gaffers Race on the 16th of July. We have a light north wind for the 31st East Coast race and some of the 94 entrants to celebrate the event which led the massive resurgence of interest in traditional sailing craft. Emma of Bosom. She's a New York sloop built 1870, an American import. Her owner Roger liked some British experimentation in her rig there. She normally has a cabin top which he uses as a dinghy. This is Thistle of Rochester. This is Hyacinth, a classic smack. Fine record when she was a workboat for fishing, fine record for racing. Here's Patience. Patience is a virtue class that is. She was built by boat building apprentices at Lowestoft. The Emma of Bosom. She's an American import, a New York scow. Setting a storm spinnaker by the looks of things. That's Roger Walker, her skipper. Super little boat. Goes like a rocket. Shrimper. Behind her is Emma the Bosom, whom we heard so much in the Shotley Classic Boat Festival.
A walk around Emma sailing up the Wallet. In fact, we had southerly 0 to 1. We
just left Pin Mill a few hours back, and we're now off Frinton. There's Clacton, land in between. There's Frinton. If I stand up and carry on turning round, there's Walton with the Naze, Walton on the Naze. The Naze Tower, great landmark at sea. We have our topsail up, setting fairly well, not a lot of wind. Had a decent bit of wind earlier. There's wee Emma, my tender, stowed on deck. Cut a sculling notch in it in the transom this winter. There's all the oilies lying out to dry. A rather splendid ketch we've just sailed through on the horizon, although he's caught up a bit again. He motored out ahead of me out of Harwich Harbour, and then I caught him up and passed him. He seems to have got a bit of wind now. Beautiful boat. I've put the VHF aerial on a little bracket on the rudder stock. Receives, I think, but I'm not too sure about transmit yet. Trusty Seagull. New blocks of wood to raise the main sheet horse. Working not too bad this year so far. Creaking a bit. And a wire rope for the rudder uphaul with a shackle that, when it's up, clips over that cleat there, and the tiller extension, which is quite handy when the Genoa's set, to be able to see the luff of the Genoa. And that's the jib sheet runner, and the blue rope is the staysail sheet, the boom foresail, and the red rope is the peak halyard. Wee Emma's strapped down. There's a cleat behind the transom there, and then just a rope just ties down to the thwart. Seems to work fine. That rope also reeves through an eye, so I can turn her over single-handed on board. There's the famous winch, and that's what it's like under wee Emma. A wonderful galvanised bucket. The warp for the kedge anchor. Two orange lines there for clearing the limber holes in the bilge. A handle for the bilge pump, and another anchor stowed there. Wind's freed a bit. I can luff up. I want to get close inshore. The tide's going to turn in half an hour, and the more closer I can get inshore, the better. try and cheat it. There's also to windward, of course, as well. While I'm filming, I can't concentrate on sailing. These old wooden blocks came with the boat. Scraped them down, gave them a bit of varnish. One of these days I've got to renew the wire. They're made from a single strand, twisted, about 1 metre long, of approximately 1mm wire, twisted round and round to form a strop. Then it's parcel served, and rather high on friction, but they're rather nice old blocks. They're ex-Navy, I think. They're stamped WD with a WD arrow, marked 93 and 83. The Yankee jib's set very high because it needs the sheet really led further aft. So it's a compromise. Second-hand sails. There's wee Emma. Not many tenders have got portholes. Means I can stand up in my bunk and peek out and check anchor bearings. The boom staysail fitting at the end, which is new this year, and the bow fitting, gammon iron and everything, made this winter. So far that's worked very well indeed. And the end fitting, there's a triple block on the end fitting there, that's worked very well as well so far. Here at the entrance of Alresford Creek, waiting for the tide.
A tour while we waited on the mud outside Alresford Creek.
Beautiful river, the River Cone. Somebody waited there by the look of it. And that's upriver, White House Beach, going round to Wivenhoe, Ballast Key in the distance. Turned out to be quite a nice day now. Looking over towards the nature reserve, fingering hoe. Very peaceful place to stop. somebody had stopped there. And that's looking down the river cone to East Mersey on the skyline, and Brightling Sea over the hill. Arrived back to find the parrel beads on the gaff jaw had come apart. What's really lucky is, lying on the deck was a little clevis pin. So all I need is a safety ring, and it can go back together again. Stroke of luck. That's where I slept last night, in my hammock under the foredeck. Centerboard case, vortex bilge pump handle, and another anchor. Here's wee Emma, built from 2 sheets of ply for the hull, 4mm ply, plus a few bits of scrap for the transom and knees and things, and another sheet of ply for the floor, a bit of 9x1 for the thwart, a bit of perspex for the windows, and quite frankly any old bits of wood to hand for the little frames and stiffening things, including an old few bits of wood from a deck chair. Quite nice wood in deck chairs. Two good cleats for laying out anchors. Another heavy work. Carried 7 people at Pagglesham, and could have carried more. Certainly there was the room and the freeboard. Not too sure about the sheer strength though. It certainly proved a good little tender, if a very odd looking tender. Still, it's a compromise. Here we have the galley drawer to starboard, and to port the navigation drawer. Even including a plastic sextant, binoculars, first aid kit, drawer, Breton plotter, spare batteries and that sort of thing, flags. That's quite a handy thing. And here we have the tool drawer, spare parts, hammers, grips and things, little box for odds and ends, and then the screw tray lifts out, and inside all spare parts, nuts, bolts and things, and touch up bits of paint, all the various paint that gets, as usually it gets knocked throughout the year. That's worked very well as well. Even room for a mastic gun and everything in there. There's the battery box and the fuse switches under a cover there, so that you can switch all the bits on. No means of charging yet. That's where the instant fuel lives. Warps under here, mooring warps. Under the starboard deck we have a borrowed radio and a donated echo sounder. Behind the thwart is a very special, important piece of equipment for holding your beer can. Folds out of the way. It's not needed. It's normally in the open position because it normally is needed. It's the loo seat that fits on top of the galvanised bucket for the bucket and chucket system. And carrying on forward on the starboard side is the spar area where you can lay long pieces of wood and whatever long things. So the oars go there, the boom crutch, the boat hook and that sort of thing. They all bundled together on that side. The bucket stows under the thwart. The bracket just came off this weekend, which is annoying. Massive 2-inch oak thwarts, and then room for another bunk to starboard. I haven't rigged the hammock yet. Spare sleeping bag and the creamy coloured thing are the heads forward. Chemical do. And coming off, got the old winch. A stalwart job. Sitting on the mud now, of course. And here we have the lead from the echo sounder transducer, which is at the back of the centreboard case. It works with the plate up and the plate down, but it doesn't work with the plate halfway up, so it obviously gets in the way. And then there's a little bit of bungee here just to clip the top of the anchor, and that's the discharge from the bilge pump, which discharges into the centreboard case. Coamings work very well. It's very strong. Takes quite a pasting. PVC capping from Wilkes at Tollsbury. Got the capping first and then made the coaming thickness to fit it. Very good working system has been the 3/4 plumber's copper tube, 22mm copper tube, and a pipe clip, and fixed through with a 2.5-inch stainless screw, counterbored by making the hole with a centre punch and a hammer and a good welly. That's worked very well. It's taken a few bashes. That's where the boom dropped onto it by mistake on one occasion. Very cheap and cheerful to replace. It really becomes seriously damaged. But 3 seasons so far and no problem at all. These are the turning blocks, cheek blocks, and a small cleat here which takes the fore steering line, which also controls the staysail boom. So you can unclip this line from the staysail boom, and then at the aft end clip it onto the tiller, and then that goes round the front of the mast, so you can steer the boat from the front, picking up anchor and that sort of thing, and then clip it onto the staysail traveller, and then you can sheet the traveller to windward if you want to lie hove to, that sort of thing, or if you want to really pinch up to windward. That's worked very well. Here we have the luff kringle reefing hook, which I made this year. Instead of a piece of rope, you just hook it through the reef kringle, and then this is the clip I made for the spinnaker pole, but in fact it doesn't work too well because there's not enough support to that pin, so I need to make a plate with a hole, plate with the axis that way, so that this pin goes through the hole and then the pin clips over. When the boom swings out, it touches the shrouds on a run, and that tends to move the spinnaker pole, and it unclips and falls out at the moment, so I must replace that fitting that I made. Plan B. And that stows along the boom out of the way. And there's another fitting I made this winter. No, not that fitting. That's the ring for the downhaul for the spinnaker pole. Uphaul downhaul. Oh, that's the fitting I made. Yes. Bit of stainless steel rod bent over. Supports the spinnaker pole this side and the top mast the other side. Just a wee loop here just to run the reef kringles through, the reef lines, reef pendants through, stop them falling down too much. Adjustable clew outhaul this year, 2-to-1 purchase at the boom end, and then the fold from that purchase comes to this block, so you've got a cascade system, and then that cleats off, so you've got a 4-to-1 purchase on the clew outhaul, which I found adequate. That's the bottom of the leech yard on the topmast. There's a bit of bamboo came from the middle of a roll of carpet for nothing, so the price was right. With a piece of wooden end made, which fits inside the bamboo to strengthen the end, and then one can make off against the sail there. I've put extra loops, extra eyelets on the leech of the topsail this year because the bamboo had too much stretch last year and wasn't controlling the leech of the sail well enough. And so far this year that's worked well. Just a little bit too close, the eye on the sail needs to be a little bit further away, a bit more tension required. The other fitting I made this year was the saddle at the end of the gaff, the idea being to get the luff of the mainsail closer to the mast. Before, the luff of the mainsail here at the throat used to come 2 or 3 inches away from the mast when it was hoisted. So I've devised this scheme where the actual tension on the throat halyard can rock it to a certain amount, but then this bar here stops against the gaff jaws, top and bottom, so it has a limited amount of travel. The eye here takes the fall of the topsail halyard, and that ring matches another ring on the the bottom part of the topmast, so that when you haul up, the fall pulls the two eyes together. And that's worked very well. Very pleased with that theory. And there's a strop here just to take the topsail sheet, keep it clear of the gaff jaws, stop it snagging. So far that's worked quite well. And to actually get in onto the sail, it's just a large 8mm clevis pin going through there. I don't take the mainsail off every time, so it doesn't really matter. The spinnaker pole fitting obviously limits, its position is limited by all the gaff lacings, and that's about a foot from the gooseneck, and I couldn't really get it up any higher. It's worked all right, but the pole does tend to run at rather a high angle. It could have done with being higher up the mast, but needs must. But it's infinitely better than the first method I used, which was to make a gaff jaws on the end of the spinnaker pole, and that was a real pain. I cracked it in the end, but it took 4 tries to sort it and stop it from jumping off every now and again. But it took so long to jibe and put on and take off. This is much better. The old mast. That came with the boat. That's very rotten now. Scraped it down. It's held up 3 seasons. The gaff I dropped the very first time, about 2 days before I was going to take the boat out for the first time. I painstakingly scraped it and varnished it with 10 coats of varnish, and I was working out how it would sit relative to the mast, and it fell off the drum support that I'd put down, and I thought that I spied a crack in the varnish, and I was very worried that the spar would snap under load, so I immediately took the surf horn and scraped off all the 10 coats of varnish and bared the wood, and then wrapped it with epoxy and fiberglass tape, and that's really worked well. It's a bit like a fishing rod now, spirally wound, and that's been a good repair job. This is a large bit of rot there, which almost went right through, which I had to take out and fit another piece of wood in, epoxy it in, and another piece of rot further down the middle. It wasn't a very good spar to start with. Second-hand, it was second-hand price, but it was a brand new mainsail, but it was just a bit short on the head and short on the foot, but needs must, and it was about a quarter of the price of the new mainsail, and it served its purpose very well. Not done too badly for 2,000 miles. The end of the foresail, the staysail boom, that's worked very well. Very pleased with that arrangement. Took a lot of thinking about. Basically, it's an old bottle screw that I got from a scrap merchant. And the hole there normally for tensioning takes the block. In fact, I had to add that on recently because it needed a little bit of extra height, but before the bottom went straight onto that rigging link there. And then these jaws are curved so that you can actually take the boom off once the boom is lifted up to the same in line with the stay, and then you can actually take it off. But the rest of the time it can pivot, go up, down, sideways, and yet stays with it, won't come off. It's just a washer, a big washer below and a smaller washer above, a lock nut there. That's it. Works well. That's a wee clip there with a bit of bungee to so that you can clip it onto the anchor, the front of the anchor, when the anchor's stowed, and that holds the boom forward as a preventer when you're running. And then the clue out haul, and that's just a bit of string there. There's a cleat here, cheap and cheerful cleat, and a clue out haul. Bit of gash 2x2 happened to be lying around, made the boom. That worked well. This Deaver's old bowsprit, thanks to John Wainwright. Not quite the right length, but it worked well. Scraped it down, slapped some varnish on it this year. And it's much stiffer than the bowsprit that I had before, which was made from 2 machine fence posts glued together. That wasn't really satisfactory at all. Forestay's too short. So it's starting to split a little bit, so I'll have to replace that sometime. The waves gently lap on the shore. It's turned out to be a beautiful day. Not a very promising start. There's the tiller that came with the boat, scraped up and varnished. And the horse before went just from deck eye to deck eye, and when sailing off the wind, the rope tension was so much across the tiller that you couldn't feel the boat, you couldn't feel the helm. So as an experiment I chopped up a couple of bits of 1-inch oak I had left over from fixing the keel and made these very simple props. And so far they've worked very well, but how long they'll last I'm not too sure. The principle is that the deck high, as originally fitted, there takes the main force, and this just really pushes it up a bit, and the knot there just to stop it from going too far that way. Just a couple of little bits of scrap stainless screwed in just to locate it, and then to stop the bottom from falling out there's just a little deck eye there. But that deck eye is taking a lot more force than I anticipated, and I think that'll have to be through bolted at some stage. I just glued these bits of door mat on with Bostik, but that hasn't lasted, so I'll just tack those on with some brass pins or something. The original mooring bits came with the boat, they're jolly good. These mooring cleats I had modified I bought some. What I enjoyed was that they lip over. They lip over so that the rope really has a good protection. But the problem was they had a hole there, there and there. This bit of metal here wasn't there at all. So I used them as a pattern, and John made them up at work for me. But now the screw holes pick up in the main meat of the transom, whereas before they were just screwed into the trim, the rubbing strake trim, which wasn't really man enough for the job, wasn't meant to do that sort of work. And now these do well. Take a lot of force, these fair leads. The rudder stock I had made in Hollowshaw when I was marooned there, when I broke my rudder stock, the one that came with the boat. I broke in the middle of the Thames estuary, which was a damn nuisance. Not far from Shivering Sand Towers. And a great boon to have a quick release cleat on a boat which hasn't got any ballast. I've added this block this year. Before it was just shackled onto the rope strop, and the rope strop started to wear, so I fitted a little block this year. And that's the purchase for the clue outhaul on the main. Just a mast band, basically a bit of stainless strip with a shaped end, pin, an old sheave from something, I can't remember what. That's just taken through there, round through the end, and back up to the block near the cleat. Carried up to the other end, so obviously you can adjust the clue when the boom's right out on the run. So far. These are tiger ties from RWO. They're jolly good. Sort of one hand sail ties. And you can put them on and take them off. Well, perhaps not put them on, but you can certainly tighten them up and take them off with one hand. It's quite handy. Very cheap, very cheerful. They work well. Did quite a lot of experimenting, working out what the best length of strop was on the gaff to present the best angle to the mast. I wanted to find just a straightforward double block, which I thought somebody must make, but I couldn't find anybody who made one, so I had to make one myself. A couple of sheaves, 60p worth of sheaves and a bit of scrap stainless, a couple of clevis pins. It's worked well. But the actual length of this strop is really quite critical, literally within inches, which I didn't realise before, how critical it was. Got really fed up climbing across thwarts. At the time of rebuilding, I was sure that we needed a thwart to support the aft of the centreboard case. In fact, that's not really as critical as the thwart that I'm sitting on. This thwart coming off this post here, which I put in, because when the centreboard is down full fully down, the top corner of the centerboard in fact pushes on the case at this point here, and this is the point where the top of the case, in fact the level just a bit below the level of these thwarts, is where the main thrust, sideway thrust of the centerboard plate is taking place. Aft, apart from supporting the case when working the winch, it's not really doing an awful lot of work. However, I'm sure in a seaway it probably helps tie the whole boat together. So I kept one side solid, but this side, to make access easier, this winter I took a chunk out of it, and so that I can hopefully, difficult to see, oh, I went the wrong way, difficult to see through the lens of the camera, so that will still give some support in a seaway, but can just take it out and stow it, but making life a lot easier. The trouble was, of course, that thwart supported this thwart, so I had to support this somehow. So my dear mother, God bless her, dead and gone now, used to make marquetry tables, and I found in her garage some old legs, DIY type legs, so I used one of those, and that's it certainly supported that well. Very pleased with that. The bilge stringers I put into the boat when I rebuilt her, and then these bits of mahogany here to stop things falling into the boat when she's heeling. Sail storage to port, lots of sails now, everyone old. And the fore hatch had to repair this year. These lugs are jolly good. These ears stop ropes from catching. When they come across, they just tend to roll up rather than snagging on the corner. That's worked very well. Little porthole from the deck light from the old boat. This is PVC matting, dartboard mat. Gives plenty of grip on the foredeck. And then the idea being here, the water has to come over the one thing first, which sort of kills the initial thrust, and then it's got to climb up the side of the actual coaming there as the second line of defence. What gets trapped in there just runs down and out. Those brass pins turned out to have steel pins, so rusted up solid last year. So I've replaced them with nylon, but that needs to be done with a great deal of care. The end of the hammock here. This is the cover. Cockpit cover. Boom cover. The old radar reflector that came with the boat, and various bits of rope, spare rope, stored up the side. There's the heads, flushing loo, life jackets, and then I decided to put the chain up forward this year. Before I carried it forward each time, but this time I've decided that I can afford a little bit of weight up forward. Now that I put the battery aft, so what was the bucket that carried the water, now I've squidged that in there behind a bulkhead that I put in, and that now takes the chain. That works quite well, very simple. The chain's a little bit high off the water line, but it does keep it clear of bilge water and saves the chain. As you can see, there is, well, no, I was going to say you can see there's some bilge water, but in fact, because she's tipped stern down, sitting on the mud, that's all run aft. Good opportunity to pump the bilge, I think. Pump the bilge. The old bronze handle. Find the keyway. There it is. And then off the pump. And that goes up there. And comes up there. Remove that. Remove that. That's one I did earlier. Yes, that's where the bilge water comes out. And that's the lead to the transducer for the echo sounder. There's the back end of the centerboard plate with a shackle there, painted white so that you can see when the plate comes up through the little window in the top of the case. I didn't bother to put a top on before, but when you're going fast, water would come out through it. Well, I suppose you can't really see anything, but you can hear it. To stop water coming in, it's just a plastic bag wrapped round the end. Acts as a non-return valve. Good old Sainsbury's food bags, and all sorts of things. The deck clock fits there. I've stowed him away. Called a deck clock, but in fact it's my alarm clock. Sits beside my bed normally. Deck clock sounds really grand. The compass mounted under the thwart midships. You can pull it out and then use it as a hand bearing compass. It's only calibrated in 5-degree marks, but to be perfectly honest, I have quite a job steering to 5 degrees. More often than not, it's about 10 degrees. So, that's about it. There she is. Waiting for the mud. Waiting on the mud for the water. And back. Pretty old thing, really. Quite beamy. Very shallow draft, 18-inch draft. Great flare on the top sides.